Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar. I'm Brandy Berry, Program Manager at ISPE, and I'll be your host today. We've opened the session a few minutes early to let everyone get settled and make sure you have a good connection. We'll get started at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. While we're waiting, I'll cover a few tips to help you get connected. If you are experiencing any issues with sound or connection, you may try the phone dial-in option, which is available in the right hand side of your control panel at the top. Just look for your local number, dial in from your phone, and change from computer audio to phone call. Please be sure to turn off your computer audio or you'll hear an echo or feedback. If you are dialing in via the phone option, please include your audio pin, which connects your phone line to your web presence. This information is also available in the email you received to join the webinar this morning. Another tip you may want to consider is using a hardwired connection instead of Wi-Fi if you do have any connection issues, or disconnecting and reconnecting, as that often helps. If you do experiencing any issues with sound or connection and miss any content, you will receive a link to view the recording of the webinar as well as a PDF of the presentation within 24 hours of today's session. You'll have access to this content on demand for 30 days. Before we get started, I'll launch a poll to see where everyone is joining us from today, and we'll leave this open until we get started at 11 a.m. So if everyone could enter what region you're joining us from, and we'll review the results before we start the webinar. If you're just joining, currently have a poll launched to select where you're joining us from today, and we'll get started at 11 a.m. Eastern. Thank you everyone for answering the poll. Just to review the results briefly, we have 44% joining us from North America, 30% from Asia Pacific region, 19% from Europe, and 7% from South America. So thank you all for joining us today. Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Validation and Transition, 2025's Top Trends, Tools, and Takeaways. Thank you for joining us. My name is Brandy Berry, Program Manager at ISPE. Before we jump into our topic, I'll just review a few quick housekeeping items. Today's webinar will be 60 minutes with approximately 45 minutes for the presentation and 10 minutes for Q&A. If you do have any questions for the speakers today, please submit them at any time throughout the presentation via the questions option, which is in your GoToWebinar control panel at the top right of your screen. And we'll do our best to get to as many of the questions as we can during the Q&A session. This session is being recorded, and we'll share the recording and a PDF of the presentation within 24 hours of the conclusion, and you'll have access to this on demand for 30 days. We'd like to thank Kneat for sponsoring the webinar today. And now I would like to introduce Jamie O'Donnell, Senior Manager, Customer Success Engineering at Kneat. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Brandy. Just give me 2 seconds there and I'll share my screen, everyone. Everyone should be able to see that. So, good morning. I'm Jamie O'Donnell, Customer Success Manager within Kneat. I've been in Kneat for about 6 years now. Prior to that, I was within the pharmaceutical industry, working with various companies around the world. So I'm going to act as your moderator here today, and we're going to get into the state of validation results and some of the trends within validation. Before we do that, I'd just like to introduce quickly to your panelists today. So first up is Tim Akin.
Yeah, hey everyone, Tim Akin. I'm a Senior Customer Success Manager also here at Kneat. Essentially, that just means I'm working to ensure that our customers are successful in their usage of Kneat just to meet their business objectives. Before that, I also worked in quality management software and as a chemist, kind of mostly focused on the QMS side of things. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. We've got Joe Azzarella.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joe Azzarella. I'm a Senior Customer Success Engineer with Kneat. Been with Kneat for about 3-ish years or so. I'm effectively Tim's counterpart, right? So when we go to implement new processes, expand your use of digital validation, we're kind of the tag team that makes that happen. As far as my career goes, a lot of my work was in lyophilization, process development, R&D, that kind of spun out into technology transfer and regulatory affairs.
Thanks, Joe. And Darragh Boyle.
Thanks, Jamie. Hi, everyone. Yep, my name is Darragh Boyle. I'm the Manager of Process Engineering here at Kneat. I've been with Kneat about 5 years or so, and before that I was a mechanical and a process engineer, primarily in capital projects in pharma and medtech. My team is responsible for implementation projects and digital transformation projects. So we take new customers and existing customers who want to transform their existing paper-based processes into digital processes, and we make that happen during an implementation project. So I'm delighted to be here and looking forward to engaging discussion.
Thanks, Darragh. So just before we begin into the full presentation, I'll just give you a little bit of background about Kneat. So Kneat is a global organization with operations in Ireland, US, France, Germany, Switzerland, Denmark, and Canada. We're a publicly traded company. We're listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange, and we're held to a high governance standards. We're a validation platform to global pharmaceutical companies and COVID-19 vaccine manufacturers. We carry out all our development in-house, so there's no outsourcing of our development because we want to ensure maximum quality for our application. We are an ISO certified company. So I'm just going to give you a bit of background about the State of Validation Report 2025 and what we're going to talk about today, where that data has come from, and then we'll get into what the actual data says from that validation survey. So the purpose of the survey. So this is the 4th year of the survey, and there has been a 75% response growth from 2024. We initiated the survey in 2022. The State of Validation is an annual global validation industry study. It's the first of its kind in the validation industry. State of Validation 2025 includes qualitative research insights and showcases trends to illustrate the evolving dynamics in the validation industry. It's the only available and actionable industry data set that enables regulatory companies to reference, benchmark, and enhance their validation programs, teams, and technologies. And it enables deeper longitudinal analysis of broader trends impacting the validation industry today. Our authors and contributors. So The 2025 report is authored by life science industry expert Jonathan Kay. He's a Harvard University alumnus and is the co-founder of one of the first online medical market research firms. With oversight from validation subject matters at Kneat and our partners at Corber Pharma and MMR Consulting. We just want to say thank you to all contributors, survey respondents, and interviewees whose insights contributed to this report, and also to let everyone here know that you can register your interest for participating in the 2025 State of Validation Survey today. So first, I'm just going to give you an overview of the data set and the demographics that we're going to deal with. We've broken the set into 4 sections: people and organizations, so that deals with the organization size, industry, the type of organization, geographic distribution, experience, job function, things like that. Validation programs, so we're going to focus on their structure, their management, goals, budget allocations, CSA adoption. Digital transformation and technology, so digital validation adoption, key barriers, implementation challenges, benefits, ROI. And finally, section 4 addresses AI integration within validation. So the adoption of AI and use cases, industry impact, primary concerns, and the evolution in validation practices. Now, Kneat is going to produce a dedicated white paper, which we're going to publish later this year, that will explore section 4 in a lot more detail. It'll be called AI Integration and Validation in greater depth with expanded insights and practical guidance based on the survey data that we received. So the first topic we're just going to go through quickly is just to give the participants here today an idea of the representation we had. So one of the questions was, what is the size of your organization? And participants included validation professionals varying in company size, years of experience, seniority, job function, location, team size. 61% of respondents did work within the life sciences industry. Others included consumer healthcare, healthcare packaging, food and beveraging, as well as equipment manufacturers. And we received a broad representation across many company sizes, from 21% of the respondents being within small companies, which have been defined as up to 100 employees, with 28% existing within enterprise companies, which are 5,000 employees and above. So I'm just going to do our first poll question here today. So the question is, what is the biggest validation related challenge facing your organization? Is it audit readiness, efficiency, compliance burden, or data integrity? So I'm just going to give everyone a few minutes just to answer that question.
Pretty interesting results coming through there too, Jamie. I don't think you can actually see the answers to these, so maybe I'll just read some of these out as we go.
Yeah, go for it, Jim.
Yeah, so it's actually pretty split, the 2 highest being compliance burden and audit readiness so far, which I think kind of mirrors the report a little bit if we're kind of jumping ahead a little.
Yeah, it really does. So let's jump forward. There's a reason we asked that question. It's because we asked the same question within our survey. We asked, what are the primary challenges your validation team faces? And again, as Tim said, audit readiness and compliance burden were at the top. So survey respondents cited audit readiness as the paramount challenge, followed closely by compliance burden. It is also interesting, efficiency and data integrity have consistently ranked among the top 5 validation challenges every year since we began this survey in 2022. So you've got audit readiness as number 1, compliance burden as number 2, data integrity is number 3, efficiency actually tied with data integrity, and then lack of human resources as number 5. So sticking on the topic of validation related challenges, I'm just going to bring in Joe here to begin the discussion around validation challenges. So Joe, what do you see as the key validation related challenge that we see in industry today?
Oof. So obviously, right, we're talking about audit readiness. And I think it gets kind of tricky because we're going from your traditional on-site type audits where you can have multiple teams preparing for them, right? You may have one group that's grabbing documentation, one group that's walking around with your auditors or inspectors, and agencies are tending to move towards digital audits. So there is a little bit of an expectation there that organizations have kind of that same flow, right? It shouldn't be a surprise if during a remote audit, a auditor or investigator asks for something in particular. Um, and I think this kind of ties into some of the other points from the poll, right? If we're talking about a digital solution, it's not just the tool itself and how that, make sure that we're ready for the audit, but it ties into our compliance burden. It ties into our efficiency as well, because the tools are only going to be as good as the people using them. So we have to pair all of that together to make sure that we're being more effective when we go and do these activities. And we have the right change management with them to handle the compliance burden, all so we can wrap it up in this nice package that you're showing to an inspector. And I think you tie all that together, and it gives this sense of, I think, confidence, which a lot of organizations need to develop as they're making this move to digital validation.
Yeah, Darragh, your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I would echo what Joe said. I mean, from speaking to customers, it's clear, particularly coming from a paper-based validation protocol or validation program, the implications of making sure you're audit ready and complying with all regulations is particularly onerous. I know, from my experience on capital projects as well, CQV and CSV often at the tail end of a significant capital project, and as such often gets squeezed. And the necessity to be efficient and you know, and drive that speed to market for these capital projects is brings a significant burden when it comes to audit readiness. And I think anywhere where you can apply a digital tool that can move from procedural controls to technical controls is massively beneficial for these organizations.
Yeah, and even things like audit readiness and lack of human resources, they can very much go together, because you've got the same resources having to handle the audit and be inside that inspection room answering questions that are trying to do validation outside on the floor as well. So the things can very much tie together. Tim, your thoughts from the customers you've spoken to about how this plays into the challenges they have today?
Yeah, I think, from a customer perspective, you hear a lot about them having to do more with less, right? Either teams getting more streamlined or budgets being impacted, that kind of thing. So it would make sense that if you're feeling that compliance burden and needing to be audit ready, um, that those are going to be the things that are top of mind. I don't think, um, as far as some of these others, data integrity and efficiency, they play in hand, but I think you see them kind of easing their way down the list a little bit because of this digital transformation. And I think this year in particular, we saw a larger uptick in the transition of customers over to a digital solution. That percentage overall is getting higher. So, if you're changing a system and you're digitizing things, how do you readily pull that information when it comes time for that assessment to give it to an auditor? So yeah, I think all of it kind of mimics and mirrors exactly what we're seeing from customers, right? Doing more with less, but having a more efficient tool. It's about how do we get that in front of an auditor to show that we're doing what we're saying that we're doing.
Yeah, it's a good point, actually, like data integrity and efficiency becoming an expectation with a digital tool. It may not have been 100% accurate in the paper-based world, but for a digital tool helping in this, it's the minimum requirement that it must have, really.
Yeah, I feel like we've all been there with like the binders of data, right? That you've got all this paper in there, and you're just trying to make sure you have what you've collected over time. You don't have that same burden, I would say, with a digital system. It just exists. It's
Yeah,
more on I need to show it. How do I get it out? And that's why I think you see audit readiness coming up to the top there.
yeah, it does. It does seem like a natural progression when you talk about it out loud, really, doesn't it? Thanks, guys. So I'm just going to jump on to the next stage of our presentation here today and some of the data we saw. So section 1 looked at people and organizations, and some of the key findings that we had there. Well, the first one was workloads are continuing to rise in 2025. 66% of respondents are reporting increased demands over the previous 12 months. That's up 61% from 2024. Now, that is a drop from the peak of 80% at 2022. But the majority of respondents across all 4 years continue to report growing workloads, confirming this is a persistent and dominant trend within the validation industry. Organizations are not investing in validation staff. So typically teams with 1 to 3 members are the most common, and it's remaining between 25 to 35% across all years of the survey. Validation is increasingly being outsourced to managed service providers. 70% of respondents are outsourcing some validation work to a third party now at this stage. There is a significant depth of experience within the validation sector. So the survey showed that most people, 42%, hold between 6 to 15 years total validation experience. And it does highlight a strong mid-career presence and a deep bench of seasoned professionals within the industry that are focused on validation and whose expertise is primarily within validation. So current validation practices and some of the key findings that the survey found there. So validation costs remain a significant challenge to control. 1 in 4 say validation consumes more than 10% of the total project budget. That's a notable share that may reflect high regulatory complexity, extensive documentation requirements, or inefficient processes that still rely heavily on manual effort. The survey reveals varying levels of adoption of CSA processes, and we'll get into that in a moment, but half are not using CSA and half are somewhat along the adoption curve. Audit readiness. So audit readiness was identified as the top goal in 2025 as organizations aim for continuous compliance and inspection preparedness. And just back to what Joe said a few minutes ago during that earlier discussion, there is a large adoption of remote regulatory audits. 2/3 of respondents reported some level of remote audit in the past year. So just on quality software assurance and its adoption rate. So the survey asked, how familiar are you with computer software assurance, so CSA? Roughly half of the respondents are not using CSA, while the other half are somewhere along the adoption curve. What was notable is that 23% are not familiar with CSA at all. And this just highlights the continuing need for education within the industry and industry-wide communication, such as provided by the ISP, to ensure that new regulations are communicated and people are becoming familiar with new regulations as quickly as possible.
Sorry, Jamie, if I could peek in there on that
Joe.
last little bit. Yeah, so I would even be willing to say that if we were to survey all of the life sciences industry, not just the folks that we had surveyed, that 23% is probably a lot higher, right? Because the folks that are talking about digital validation, not to give ourselves too much credit, but are probably at the forefront of the technologies, right? We have exposure to them. We know these ideas. So if the experts among the pack, a quarter of them aren't familiar with CSA, then you really have to wonder what the rest of the industry looks like. So I think there's a much bigger education and training gap that we realize.
Yeah, and it does make sense. We live in the digital validation world. CSA is something that comes up for us the whole time. Not everyone lives in that world, so it is something to be aware of, that there are probably more people out there who may not know anything about it.
Yeah, and I think I'd kind of add on to Joe's statement there with, a lot of times, especially customers that I work with, um, you you get something that works and you don't really want to change it just to change it, right? And I imagine Darragh shaking his head because he deals with this in projects all the time. There you have a system that, sure, it may not be as efficient as it could be, or you could be taking on some ways to make it more, you know, CSA friendly or whatever. But if it's working and you're not getting findings and you're able to justify and do it the way that you want to, why change it if you don't have to? I would agree that this doesn't shock me and what I deal with my customers.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
I'd agree, especially when you consider a couple of slides previously there, but the increased workload and the relatively small teams, like, CSA, and I'm sure we'll speak to it later, but CSA maybe isn't as seismic a shift as a lot of people might realize on the face of it. But any change, particularly when workloads are high and team numbers are small, is a massive challenge, particularly in our kind of generally quite risk-averse industry.
Yeah, it definitely is. So just some of the top goals of validation and some of the trends we're seeing around that. So the question here was, what are the primary goals of your organization's validation program? Being more audit ready and audit success tops the agenda in 2025. Again, we're seeing the same things come true in the data over and over again. It highlights the industry's shift towards proactive compliance strategies amid growing regulatory scrutiny. And creating process efficiencies continues to be a dominant goal year over year as organizations strive to manage increased workloads with lean teams. Now, we've already kind of started this conversation a little bit, but the discussion two is around CSA engagement and top goals. So Darragh, you're the person who heads up the deployment of new processes out to customers.
Mm.
I'd like your thoughts on the CSA adoption and some of the numbers we're seeing back here.
Yeah, I'd kind of echo what Tim said. Perhaps not entirely surprised. I'd also agree with what Joe had said around maybe 23% is actually an inflated figure when you consider the wider industry. When it comes to awareness, I think perhaps there's a misunderstanding of CSA out there among people that maybe passively have heard of it. CSA isn't a new regulation. It's not a seismic shift. It's, if anything, it's a refined interpretation of existing rules. There's draft guidance going back to 2022. But I think while it's not a seismic maybe or a massive procedural overhaul, it does represent a cultural reset. And those of us that are, I suppose, experienced in traditional CSV, there's almost a kind of a feeling that document heavy equals quality. And CSA kind of asks you to flip that on its head a little bit and ask what's the risk and what's truly needed. And when we're dealing with really experienced teams that have high workloads, and teams that are working under short timelines, there can be an element of resistance to change. I think CSV feels safe, and CSA demands an agility and a kind of a smarter approach to assurance. That said, I think increasing that awareness and proper educational programs across organizations, just to highlight some of the massive benefits that can be seen from CSA. It encourages you to take a risk-based approach, which, by the way, again, is not something new, but encourages you to really spend your effort where you should be spending it when it comes to software assurance, and take a lower risk, unscripted approach to those lower risk areas of the application. So I think there's massive benefits out there being left on the table. I think when it comes to digital validation platforms, I think they can really help organizations operationalize CSA rather than just digitize their existing CSV processes.
Yeah, no, it's excellent points. Joe, Tim, I'd just like to get your thoughts here actually on the being more audit ready and audit success coming up the top, given what you said already around audits and around data integrity. That clearly is becoming more and more important.
It is, and I think Darragh hit a really strong point there with CSA not so much being this kind of like brand new process that was developed. But if you take a look at the top three goals for 2025, being successful at audits, having process efficiencies, and introducing new technologies, and I would even challenge to call that just new ways of thinking, new approaches to improve validation. Well, what do you know? If I follow CSA the way that those draft guidance documents are working, all three of those things are going to line up together. I'm going to be able to do my processes quicker. I'm going to introduce them something new. And if I really am an expert on it, when I'm sitting across from that auditor, and there is kind of this awkward moment, right, where you may be teaching an auditor what CSA is as you're going through your digital validation system or whatever it may be, um, that makes your audit a lot more successful, right? It's not a good position to be in where you're explaining the steps that you may have taken, and you fall into kind of this trap that Darragh had mentioned about more, or Tim, I forget who said it, but the idea that if I have a lot of paperwork associated with it, then I clearly have done my homework. But instead to come in with a sense of confidence of saying, no, I understand the underlying concepts of my process. This is all I had to do, and I can prove that to you. That makes for a much more enjoyable, almost, and a more successful audit.
I do wonder too, Joe, if you think some of that is also contributing to this being more front of mind, namely being that if they're kind of trying to teach an auditor about CSA while they're explaining their tool, while they're explaining what they did, do you think that contributes to this kind of overall stressor about being audit ready?
I think so, right? It goes back to the digital tool only being as good as the people that are using them, right? So for, again, whatever tool you're going to use, I think industry needs to accept the fact that they're going to have to move to digital validation at some point. Teams are already small enough, but it might be worth looking into making sure that you have someone that really is a champion for that product or tool, that's someone that really is an expert on it, and treat them just like you would any other SME when it comes to that audit.
Yeah, no, definitely. The one thing that actually jumped out at me around the audits, and you can see in 24 and 25 how audits were number 2 and then all of a sudden became number 1. I have to wonder, is that to do with remote audits becoming more and more prevalent? That people are more conscious of audits now. They can be remote. People get pulled in easier. It's not this room in a building. It's everywhere. It's all the time. So I just wonder, is that impacting the perception of audit being more and more important? Is that audit readiness and the remote audits happening more and more?
I think so. I think you combine that with that, probably that first moment of shock for a company that's on a paper-based system and realizes, oh, I have to scan this. Oh, I have to send it over.
Yeah.
What do we use as a secure portal? And as they're answering all of those questions mid-audit, in the back of their mind are thinking, okay, well, we can't do this again. This was a one-time mistake we got to make.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, guys. Some great insights there. So we're going to go into section 3 now for the survey. So digital transformation and technology. So again, some of the key findings that we're seeing in this. The survey results underscored a sizable shift towards digital validation in the industry. Education and training gaps account for the largest share of cited obstacles to digital validation adoption, highlighting a strategic opportunity for upskilling and external support to drive adoption. Data integrity remains the highest ranked benefit of digital validation, and it was the same in 2024. Of those who say they have already adopted or are currently adopting a digital validation system, 56% reported that ROI met, somewhat exceeded, or significantly exceeded their expectations. 21% found it was too early to tell. Respondents ranked safe and secure storage of validation records as the most important function of a digital validation system, underscoring the critical role of data integrity, audit readiness, and regulatory trust. While adoption of digital validation is growing, integration to key systems like project management, analytics, tech transfer tools came out as something that remains limited within the industry, so something that needs to be looked at. So just staying on the topic of digital transformation, from the attendees here today, just to understand, where are you on your digital journey? Is it starting today with this webinar? Are you on initial discovery, some prep work and discussions done? About to launch your first digital validation project, or have already delivered some projects digitally? So just give a sense of where we are today. And again, similar to the last poll, we asked the same question to the respondents in the survey. So it's a great opportunity to compare what we're seeing within that survey poll to the wider group here today.
Yeah, and so far, I would say that they do kind of mimic what we would have seen. So on the some projects delivered path, so kind of have implemented something, we're up at about 45%. Initial discovery and some prep work at 24, about to launch is at 8, and then people who are just starting out with this webinar about 22%, Jamie.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Tim. So again, very representative of what we saw during the survey. 58% currently use digital validation systems. That is a 28 percentage point increase from 2024, when only 30% reported to use digital validation systems. So the expansion of digital validation has increased an awful lot in just 1 year. There are now only 7% of organizations that are not pursuing a digital validation, but their reasons do differ based on scale. Common concerns dominated for smaller companies is cost. For larger companies, it's more cultural challenges or strategic friction that they might see. So you can see digital validation is becoming the norm, if not already. So implementation challenges. What were the biggest challenges that organizations faced when managing an implementation project for a digital system? nearly half said complexity of validation itself was the top challenge. Overcoming resistance to change was the second most common challenge. And close to 40% struggle with ensuring user adoption. So you can see there are challenges with digital validation, and those need to be addressed. And we'll jump onto those challenges and discuss them in a little bit more detail. But I think it's good to see the challenges, but also what are the benefits of digital validation. So the benefits that we're seeing from validation, there was no change in the top three from the 2024 results. Continuous audit readiness ranked just behind data integrity, with audit readiness now ranked as the #1 digital validation challenge. Systems are proving essential to helping with this. So #1 was data integrity, #2, continuous audit readiness, and enable global standardization was #3. And just to give a sense of the voice of the customer here, one of our customers did give a quote for this. And the question was, how has the increasing regulatory focus on data integrity affected your validation practice in recent years? And the quote back was, when things are paper-based, weird things can happen. From a validation perspective, when everything is digital, there is a kind of data integrity that comes with the digital system. So that comes from a validation director in North America. And Tim is the person who interacts with customers day in, day out and trying to help them achieve their goals. What do you see in this quote that kind of resonates with you?
So I think Tim just had a technical
We lose
difficulty,
Tim.
so I'll just chime in for a second. But the thing that stands out is, and he says it right in the very beginning, if something's paper-based, weird things can happen. And again, I'll take it from the audit stereotype, where if I'm in a paper-based system, I generally will have one person that goes and collects, let's say, a protocol that I need to show an auditor. That goes into a separate room, and I'm going to have my quality team give one last look at it before we show it to an auditor, right? Just a quick sanity check. In a paper-based world, you may have someone who wrote an interesting footnote or referenced something that doesn't exist, or there's typographical error, and you are stuck at the last minute scrambling. And then you have a person who's sitting across from the auditor that has to explain themselves and try to effectively stall for time while you make that fix. The auditor's going to catch it anyways, and it's just an awkward situation for everyone. With the digital system, there is no opportunity for that. Right? Everything remains the same. You have strict control over the comments that are made, the signatures that are made. So yeah, there's no opportunity for kind of these scenarios that no one would have ever predicted.
Yeah, that definitely is. And Tim, I think you're back online. Any thoughts on this and things you hear from customers?
Yeah, for sure. And I think the important takeaway isn't that data integrity is any less important. I think it's just that the focus on, what's top of mind day in, day out is that the digital tool is allowing that to focus somewhere else, right? You don't have to worry about the integrity of that data as much. Obviously, they still do. We get audited and assessed and everything just speaking from a Kneat perspective, we get audited to that to ensure that that data is there and that it's reliably pullable and all of that kind of stuff. So it still has to hold up. We're just allowing customers to focus that energy on those other things. So yeah, I think it tracks exactly what we hear from customers. We want to take as much of the things away from their I don't know the right word I'm thinking of, but we don't want them to have to focus on those things. They can focus on the efficiency gains, on the CSA stuff that allows them to kind of better handle their overall validation programs. We'll handle integrity, we'll handle the other stuff, and just make sure that they can do that.
Take some of that mental load off them and allow them to focus on what matters to them and not worry about the small stuff that can be taken care of by a system. Yeah. So into our next discussion topic. So digital validation and technology. So we saw some of the implementation challenges back here. And Darragh, your team works in actually implementing digital systems and our digital system for our customers. So how do these challenges resonate with you and with what you see in the field?
Yeah, I wasn't surprised by the results. I would say, Jamie, if I take that top one there, complexity of validation. I actually think there's two ways of interpreting that that result. We could consider it the complexity of validating the digital tool itself, which reinforces the need for a more agile CSA approach, particularly when so many digital tools are SaaS based. And on the other hand, maybe the complexity of the validation process being digitized. And what I often find from working with customers is, we see in our group implementing validation processes for many of the largest life sciences companies across the world. We hear that all the time. Our validation process is particularly complex. Our process is different. And ultimately, it's all the same V model, right? There are different ways of interpreting it and different ways of satisfying it. But when you dig into that complexity, I would argue a lot of times the complexity is often related to process steps that are there because of paper-based systems and that need to imply so many procedural controls. So I think while it is a challenge, the complexity of validation, digital validation tools provide a significant ability to simplify those validation processes. Some
Yeah,
other maybe takeaways I've seen is around that resistance to change, and I think we see that across and throughout the presentation. And just to throw back to Joe's point there around ensuring that there's a champion in some of these relatively small teams, a champion that understands how the process works, how the digital tool works, and is eager and is keen to learn, can really help drive and make that implementation journey a lot easier.
yeah, I think so. And I think that ensuring adoption, it can be a fear because you invest so much in getting the system in, you want it to be adopted, and there can quite often be a slowness to change, and that's not even a digital validation thing. I remember implementing Pi as a monitoring tool within manufacturing before, and similar events, people didn't like something new. They were happy with what they were doing new, were comfortable with it. So it can be hard to adopt new tools, even when there is huge benefits for them. Joe, Tim, just on the benefits, do these benefits align to what customers are telling you guys, or is there other stuff you're seeing, or what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah,
I don't
I
think
mean,
any.
sorry, go
Oh,
ahead,
go
Joe.
ahead.
You go for it.
Okay, I was going to say it all seems to line up really nicely as far as again from like the audit preparedness side. Nothing too unique or exciting there.
Yeah,
Tim,
I
any thoughts on
agree. I think you know, data integrity obviously is we've already kind of hounded on that one a little bit, but I do believe that that is one of the biggest side effects of digital solutions. Global standardization, that one seemed maybe a little bit high given that it really depends on the customer on what they're looking for. Some of them really do want to harmonize globally, but then you get in scenarios where everybody does things their own way, especially at individual site levels. So, having a tool definitely facilitates that. Um, so yeah, these all seem to align with what our customers say.
Yeah, perfect. So we're just going to jump on to kind of the last portion of our discussion here today. And we're
Actually,
just going to
Jamie,
take a look at,
can I
okay,
say one more
great.
thing? I just noticed it when you switched the slide. If you go back one, um, there was one about protecting quality, and that one may be just a little bit under uh, kind of calculated there, because I would say one of the biggest benefits is, especially when you're getting into a solution that is kind of managed from a top-down level, is that they have to kind of follow your flow, right? So that things like deviations and right first time kind of come inherent. So that one kind of maybe feels a little bit low to me. I don't know how, Joe, you may have some thoughts on that too.
I wonder if that's tied into the idea, some of the other ideas, right? Like getting into audit readiness, getting into data integrity, right? Or to put it another way, I don't know how you can be concerned about one without automatically being concerned about the other.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it could just be how people perceive the question as well. Those kind of things can
Yeah.
play
Exactly.
with these. So just before we finish up, and we're at the kind of last portion of this section of today's agenda. So validation leaders saw it coming. So in 2024, during the State of Validation Survey, we asked this question: how do you see validation industry evolving over the next 5 years? In the 2024 survey, digital and automated validation was seen as the clearest path forward. And I kind of think we've seen that come true to fruition already, with so many people having jumped to digital validation and a 30% increase on people using digital validation from last year to this year. And in 2025, 93% currently use or plan to use digital validation systems. So that jump has really taken off in the last 12 months. But number two last year was machine learning and AI. And this just shows that the industry has already recognized the potential of AI, and they did last year. So in the 2025 survey, we asked the follow-up question: does your organization currently use AI in your validation activities? 28% of respondents are in the planning phase, so they are planning on using some level of AI. 16% have begun actively using AI in their validation processes, so it is starting to come in. It's still low level. 46% of organizations are currently not considering AI for validation activities. I think this just highlights the opportunity for innovation and a competitive advantage within the AI space for validation professionals. So again, just to kind of bring it back to the people here today, does your organization currently use AI in your validation activities? Yes, no, but you're planning to implement, or no, you're not considering?
Yeah, Jamie, I think just from what you just showed, I think that does show, like, it aligns pretty well with our customers just being generally risk averse. You know what I mean?
Yep.
That it's not surprising. And so the results coming in so far basically mirror that too. So not considering, planning to implement at some point is at 35%. Not considering at all, I'm sorry, was it 47%? And then just a yes, they're going to use it as at 16. So yeah, pretty
Pretty much
even with what
exactly.
we saw. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's a consistent trend across the industry. So just a conclusion and recap the key findings from the survey. So the workforce is under pressure. Audit readiness is now the top challenge. Teams face increasing workloads and limited resources, making strategic resourcing, upskilling, and retention essential for the industry. Fragmentation persists, so many global validation programs remain decentralized. Centralized frameworks and digital tools are key to driving harmonization and meeting regulatory expectations. Digital validation goes mainstream, so the adoption has jumped to 58% in 2025. To maximize ROI, organizations must prioritize implementation planning, user adoption, and system integration. And then finally, AI is on the horizon. Although still in its early use, AI is gaining traction, and I think now is the time to build internal capabilities and monitor regulatory developments around AI that are currently being produced and we're starting to see come out from various bodies around the world. So to keep up to date on those, and as I said, Kneat is going to produce a white paper around AI specifically later this year out of these survey results. So that's everything from the presentation portion. And again, you can learn more or sign up for the 2026 survey at stateofvalidation.com. So now we're just going to spend a couple of minutes looking at some of the questions that you might have asked during the presentation. So let me just stop sharing there for a second and I'll pull up some of those questions. Not sure if we've got any questions. Oh, right, here they go. So question one, are you expecting that the FDA's current CSA guidance, the main one being still in draft and specifically addressed only in MD industry, to be applicable to the pharma sector too? Darragh, I'm going to give that one to you.
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I think so. So the FDA guidance is primarily initially focused on coming from a medical device point of view under 21 CFR 820. But the principles for CSA, such as risk-based assurance, critical thinking, least burdensome approach, are echoed elsewhere in GAMP5 and in other guidance. So all of those are compatible with pharmaceutical and biological regulations. It, like I said, CSA is not a new regulation, it's a clarification of existing expectations, and those can be adopted by any regulated company under 21 CFR Part 11, 211 and 820. So I would say yes, in short.
Yeah. As an equipment supplier for the pharmaceutical manufacturing, we currently prepare qualification documents manually and send hard copies to my clients for execution. Is it possible to integrate AI to automate the creation and review of these qualification documents with a human interface and enable digital execution at site? I might take that one. There's a lot. AI is definitely possible to help these things. We're already starting to see tools that can help auto generation of test cases and things like that. I think there is integration that can help with those. I think the questioner hit on the key aspect here is human interface. You're going to have a person there. AI can draft a protocol, draft test cases, but I think we're still at the stage where it needs to be reviewed by a person. And then it needs to go into a system that can allow digital execution, a system such as Kneat that can allow for that. So it is a matter of just understanding what you want to do. But I think what that question has asked is already happening. We are seeing AI generate test cases. We are seeing those test cases be executed digitally at various sites, be it a vendor, be it a customer, be it a manufacturing site, be it during a FAT, whatever it is. I think those kind of use cases are being seen already. Question 4, what are the common tools being used for digital validation? Tim, I might get you to chime in on that one.
Yeah, I think it can vary quite significantly from something as simple as, spreadsheets, Google Docs, something that is very minimally digital, right? Saving things onto a shared drive. That could be a form of digital validation. And then it goes all the way up to dedicated tools that are designed for that purpose. Something like Kneat would be. There are a few of those tools in the marketplace now. And in that case, they're very specifically designed to allow for digital validation within them. And then, things like data integrity, they're designed to fulfill Part 11 requirements, that kind of stuff. So yeah, it can span the whole gamut there, but in most cases, and what we will interact with in our jobs because we work at Kneat is that full digital tool.
Yeah. Next question. Can you please tell me some tools and implementations of machine learning AI in digital validation? Joe, I might pass that one to you.
Ooh. So this one's, I really like this question because whoever submitted this they hit their head in the right place. What I've seen with most of our customers have done is they have actually built their own systems to look at documentation to be able to interpret that data. And there's plenty of open source models out there that you would be able to go and construct, right? And the nice thing with open source is you can kind of see what's under the hood. Otherwise, any of your, I would say, larger scale AI manufacturers or producers, so like a Claude and OpenAI, all of those have the ability to be customized or to create specific agents based on your own documentation. I would say the more important thing for the user that submitted this question is to make sure that whatever tool you decide on, you're able to train it on the data that you find important. So whatever your current paper processes are, maybe you are using a digital tool, have a plan in place to get that information over to your AI. Otherwise, it will be kind of generic and not particularly useful.
Yeah, and I think it probably, I know we mentioned kind of risk averse there a while ago. I think the fact that they're building their own tools kind of shows that kind of risk mentality, kind of, I'll build my own using the same technology so that I'm not at risk. And I think it's similar to, like, we all work in a SaaS provider, similar to doing on-prem. We kind of rebuilt everything over and over again. I wonder down the line, will we get to the situation where people are comfortable enough with AI to feel like they don't have to build and can take advantage of those improvements that are coming the whole time? Next question. So use of AI in validation, was that meant as a generic function like translation, summarizing, or AI in a process being validated? Within the survey, it was meant very much as the functionality of AI being used. Are using it for summarizing and generation of report, generation of test cases. AI of processes being validated. I don't think we've seen any examples of that yet. Now, Joe, Darragh, definitely jump in here if I'm wrong, but I don't think we've seen an AI process being validated itself just yet.
No, bits and pieces, but no one, to my knowledge, has kind of done the full process.
Yeah, I think I would say that from a customer perspective, what the things that we hear mostly are on efficiency gain sides. It's
Mm.
can I use a tool to help minimize the effort of a task that takes a long time, right? Um, that aligns pretty well with I think what you're talking about here. It's not the full process. It's not doing a full validation. It's just here's the thing I want it to do. Can I have it do that instead of me?
Yeah, I think it's very much the AI assistant versus AI agent concept. You know,
Yeah.
we're using AI maybe to help write draft lists of requirements, draft test cases, but maybe not perform critical tasks just yet independently.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've only got a couple minutes left, so I'll make this the last question and then hand it back over. What specific skills should students develop now to succeed in a digital validation or QA role within the pharmaceutical industry? Getting some deep topics here today. Joe, do you want to jump into that one first?
Yeah. So in that type of role, especially on the QA side of things, I think the most important thing um, is you have to be a scientific translator, right? You're going to be working with people that are experts in their field. We saw it in the validation survey earlier. Most people have 6 to 15 years experience validation. You're going to be working with maybe folks from the laboratories who have only ever focused on working in the laboratory. Um, so, in a role where you're this QA digital validation expert, you need to be able to understand what it is they do and understand the importance of it and be able to translate it into this system. So, being able to kind of put on all those different hats, I think, is the most important thing.
Darragh, Tim, any other thoughts on that?
I think maybe one skill set that I think is becoming increasingly important, and in fact, there's a whole section in the second edition of GAMP5 on this is around just generally critical thinking. It goes back to what we said previously about what is the purpose of validation? Is the purpose of validation to produce documentation, or is the purpose of validation to really challenge the system that you're testing against? And I think students that can apply and zoom out for a second really think, okay, what system or piece of equipment am I validating here, and why, and what's the impact? Where's the risk? And where should we put our efforts? So developing that ability to think about the process as a whole rather than just focusing in on the task of creating protocols and documentation would be key, I think.
Yeah,
Yep.
definitely.
I couldn't have said it better. That's the line I was going to go down, and it's about curiosity and asking the right questions. Yep.
Yeah, and one thing that I think is that innovation as a skill, that in a risk averse industry, it might be sometimes challenging to move innovations along and get them across the line. But even asking the question, how can I use this new tool? If AI comes in, what can I do with it? How can it improve? Will it be perfect? Maybe not, but by asking the question, you'll have a conversation. You get people thinking, and that will move processes along in of itself and just get people moving forward. So I think that's a skill that can never go wrong in any industry. I think that's the last of the questions I'm seeing here anyway. So yeah, look, thank you everyone for joining us. I'll hand it back over to Brandy for any closeout here that she's got.
Thank you, Jamie. On behalf of ISPE, I would like to thank all of our speakers today, Joe, Darragh, Tim, and Jamie for providing great information in today's webinar, as well as all of our attendees for joining us today. As we wrap up, just want to remind everyone that you will receive the recording in PDF within 24 hours, and you'll have access to this for 30 days. If you enjoyed today's session, we have a full webinar calendar on a variety of topics. Some of our upcoming webinars are listed on the screen. We encourage you to visit ispe.org/webinars for more information. ISPE always strives to be here for all of your professional needs, and we encourage you to make the most of your membership by visiting our communities of practice, our past webinars library, where you will find this webinar as well, all our blogs, our PE articles, which are all a part of being a member. And for more information on these resources or to find out how to join, you can visit ispe.org. Finally, we'd appreciate your feedback on today's session as well as your ideas for upcoming topics. A survey will be sent to you in that email you'll receive afterward, and we encourage you to take a few moments to complete it for us. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to Kneat, and we will see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.